kids.
Hello.
I'm Luella Reith. I am a school teacher. It is 1905. I teach 5th and 6th grade at Washington Elementary here in Lake City, and these are a few of my students.
Hello.
I was born in 1879 in Minnesota City, the daughter of Herman and Mary. My father was a blacksmith. I grew up in Minnesota City and attended Winona Normal School with my sister Emma. My mother actually got an apartment in Winona and stayed with my sister and I the entire time we attended school. In 1900, I took a train to Lake City. I boarded locally with a family as with another teacher, and I taught at Washington Elementary from 1900 until 1906, at which point I met my darling husband Friedhoff. And at that time I couldn't be married and have children and teach, so I had to give up my job and stay home and raise my family. I ended up having 3 children. One is right behind over there, Willard, and his wife Anna Marie. My husband Friedhoff was also a Lake City citizen. He was born and raised, spent his entire life here in Lake City, went to school here, went to the commercial college here. He started a grocery here in Lake City that lasted over 40 years. In 1923, he partnered with Sheehan's and started a furniture undertaking business, which was the 5th one at that time, currently in operation in Lake City. They purchased the Hanisch Bake Upper House in 1920, which to this day is still in the family. The Peterson family has had a long history in educating our local youth here in Lake City. To this day, this is actually Emma, who is my great-great-granddaughter, and her mother is currently a teacher also. So the history of education in their family is extremely rich in our community. You girls want to introduce yourselves?
We are Miss Reith's students. I am Ruth, and I was born in 1898, and I'm 12 years old.
My name's Catherine. I am Miss Reith's student, one of her students, and
You were born in you're 12 too.
yeah.
You were born in 1898.
I am also one of Mrs. Reith's students. My name is Emma. I was born in 1900, so that makes me 10 years old, and I'm happy to be in her class.
Thank you. Luella did live to be 102 years old. She died in 1981. She was the first resident of the Lake City nursing home, and both her and her husband had a very rich life in Lake City as far as in the civic organizations, churches, and other community organizations. And I have under here, I have a cookbook with some of her recipes in it that we found. It was pretty amazing, and some school books from Lake City schools.
I'm representing Ed Storing. Ed Storing was born in 1888, and he lived here in Lake Pepin, and from the time he was a young child, or a young man anyway, until into his early or late 20s, he was in the button industry. He was basically a clammer, and the story he tells us is, the story that I'm telling you is that we clammed the Mississippi River right here in Lake City and Lake Pepin for a good number of years through my youth. We used a boat that was probably 5 feet wide and maybe 15 feet long. It had a flat bottom in it, and we had probably 3 clamming bars on this boat. These clamming bars would have hooks like I'm showing you here. And there'd be probably 30, 40 clamming hooks on each bar, hung in rows, and these clamming hooks would then be drug over the clam beds, and the clams would then latch onto these. Any clam that was open would grab onto this and hang on for dear life. And of course we would bring them up on the boat and pull those clams off those hooks, drop that bar into the water, and pull up another one. We usually had 3 of these clamming bars on each boat. We would then at the end of a day, we would bring these clams to shore and we would begin to cook them open. It would take as much as an hour or so of steaming them before they actually died, and then we'd open them up. We could open them with a knife too, but it was a lot more work. Just steaming them open was a lot easier. And in the process of opening them, we would get rid of the meat, but also we'd be looking for pearls. These pearls were oftentimes pretty small and odd shaped. And we called them slugs, and we called them chicken feed. We called them, well, we had other names for them too, but I won't mention them. And we would sell those to the clam or the pearl buyers. There were pearl buyers all around the lake all the time, and we'd probably only get 15 cents or a quarter, or sometimes a dime for these pearls. But you know, when we were looking for just $2 a day, that was quite a bonus. There are stories, although I never found a pearl this valuable, but there are stories of people finding pearls that were quite valuable. In fact, one of them was reported to be worth $1,500 to $2,000. And back in 1915, that was like hitting the lottery. With that kind of money, you could buy a farm. Now here, did I mention already that here in Lake Pepin, we didn't process the buttons to their full extent? Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, the Lake Pepin Pearl Button Company and the Wisconsin Pearl Button Company were just saw houses. They just cutting houses. They just sawed or cut the blanks out of the shells and bundled them up in probably sacks of about 50 pounds each. And then those sacks were then shipped on down the river, perhaps to La Crosse, or maybe even as far down south as Muscatine, Iowa, where they were processed into the final product that we see today. They were sewn on cards or sold in gross, lots of 144 or so. The only information that I have about Ed Storing is the article that was written in the paper. It was written in the 1960s, and if Ed hadn't written that article for the Red Wing paper, we wouldn't have that information. We wouldn't have the information that we have now. And I was telling the other fellow that was here that I met his granddaughter, or great-granddaughter, in our store here in town, the Lake Pepin Pearl Button Company. And she came to see where her grandfather worked. Her great-grandfather worked. She'd heard that he worked at a Lake Pepin Pearl Button Company. When she came into our store, she was not only surprised to see that it was open, but we were surprised to see her too, and we talked about it quite a bit. And I intend to get in a hold of her now that I've done this, and finding out a little bit more about her great-great-grandfather, because there's a good chance that he fought in World War I, maybe World War II. He lived a long life, so what we're talking about here is the first 30 years of it. So what happens to the other 70? And I'm interested, I really am. The Wisconsin Pearl Button Factory, I believe, I've been told, was more towards the water, and it was towards the marina, where the marina is now. It wasn't that, probably a block and a half, 2 blocks from where the Lake Pepin Pearl Button Company is. But it burned down, and I believe it burned down in the early 20s, maybe even the late teens.
I'm Thomas P. Grogan. P stands for Patrick. I was named after my father. Was born October 25th, 1877. I lived to be 76 years old and died January 31st, 1954. Married my wife Nellie. She was Nellie Foley when we got married in 1903. That was April 15th, tax day. I remember it well. I was the first automobile dealer in Lake City, kind of located where the dollar store is presently. And we sold an automobile called the Dort, D-O-R-T. It's manufactured in Flint, Michigan. Pretty darn good car. Problem was Henry Ford was kind of competing against us with his Model T, and he could make it a lot less than we could because he kind of started that assembly line. So our automobiles were 600 to 1,000, where he was putting that Model T out in 1915 for about $400. So it kind of did us in. But they made the Dort automobile from 1915 to 1924. And then I kind of went back to farming after that in Wabasha County. And I also kept the garage and stored vehicles in it. Eventually it was turned into a roller rink back in the 60s on the first level, and then on the second level was apartments. What else can I tell you? I'm not sure exactly where I lived in town. I kind of forgot about where that is. We had 3 children.
Well, I'm William Wilson. I was born on the island of Jamaica on October 5th, 1864. My parents were both, they're both missionaries with the Congregational Church. I later I spent my childhood at Jamaica, and we later came to Illinois. I got my degree. I went to medical school, and I got my degree from Chicago Medical College in 1891. One of my classmates was actually the Charles Mayo, one of the founders of the Mayo Clinic. And the Dr. Charlie and I still see one another when we have time. When I first graduated from medical college, I went to Faribault State Hospital. I was there for 2 years. I met my wife when I was there. She lived in Waseca. We married at the home of her sister on October 2nd, 1894. In the meantime, I had moved to Lake City with the encouragement of Martin Collins. He is a local pharmacist here. Marty's been practicing in town since 1881. He now has his own pharmacy. In a way, the relationship between a pharmacist and a doctor at that time was quite close, and Marty wanted someone in his own age bracket here in town. So I moved here at that time. My first office was at the intersection of Washington and Center Street, the southern part of the intersection there, or actually the western part of the intersection. In the meantime, I got married. We had a child, Arthur. Arthur was born on July 18th. That was 1895. We needed a larger place, so we decided to build a house at the intersection of Lyon and Avenue and High Street. In those days, most doctors had their office right in their house, so we decided to add a waiting room, an examination room to the eastern part of the structure. We were able to occupy that house in 1897. I was close enough to downtown, so I felt I didn't have to build a stable for a horse. Anytime I made a house call, I would simply rent a horse and a buggy or a horse and a sleigh, depending on the season, from the Lake City Livery Company, which is down on the North Washington Street in Lake City. There was no resident doctor in the city of Stockholm, so I decided to have a practice there. As a matter of fact, I built a rather large practice there. In the winter, I would rent a horse and sleigh and go over the ice. In the summer, I would simply take the Lake Pepin ferry. They had a boat that went back and forth 4 or 5 times a day, so I would simply take that. When I first started practicing, the doctor's office was really, it was more than just a nursing, like a nurse's station. It was also a hospital. But as time went on, things got more complex. We needed, so we decided we needed a hospital in town here. So a bunch of us got together and we formed the Lake City Hospital Association, and we bought the old Allen Greer House down on Main Street. It's now Lakeshore Boulevard for $4,500. That was bought in the year 1915. And now we're in the middle of a depression. That was an old house. It was a nice old house, but it wasn't built as a hospital. And the medical profession has really changed in the last 40 years. I used to, when I went on a house call, I could carry whatever medication I wanted and whatever instruments I needed in my black bag. Now, because of radiology and laboratory, most people come to the clinic, of course.
I'm Mary Thompson, and I was born July 7th, 1866 in Necedah, Wisconsin. And later my family moved to Waseca, Minnesota, And as a young lady, I met Will then when he was doctoring at the Faribault Hospital. And we had got married in my sister's home in Waseca on October 2nd, 1894. And Will had his practice here in Lake City, so I moved here. And we had one son, Arthur. He was born July 17th, 1895. And he is currently a salesman for a local coal company. We had a beautiful home built on the corner of High and Lion, right across from the library, and it was a very modern building because we had both running water and electricity. And
Well, in those days, most doctors had their offices right in their house. So what we did was add a waiting room and examination room to the house on High Street. And then also, my patients would of course come to the house, so to let them know I was home, I'd leave a light on in the office. I also added a speaking tube from the front door. This was the day before telephones. So I added a speaking tube from the front door up to the second floor bedroom. So people could call me, patients, when they came.
In emergencies, in the
and
middle
this
of
sort of
the
thing.
night.
There was an older doctor in town when we first got here.
Yes.
His name was Dr. Vilas.
Vilas, yes.
He used to tell these funny stories.
Yes, he was a pioneer doctor, and he used to talk to us, tell us all these funny stories. And one I remember very well is he had taken horse and sleigh in the dead of winter way out into the country to attend a patient. And when he was all done, it was during the Depression, people just didn't have money. And when he was all done taking care of this gentleman, he said, "I'm sorry, Doc, I have no money to pay you." But he said, "I butchered pigs a couple weeks ago." And he said, "There's a frozen pig hanging in the barn." So Dr. Vilas talks about how he sat this frozen pig on the seat next to him in the sleigh, and it was jumping or jiggling around as he drove home, and that was his payment for his services, which was quite common in those days.
I'm Mrs. James Noble Munro. My maiden name is LuLu Bird Maybe. I was born April 3rd, 1873, and I come from pioneer stock here in this area. My grandfather William Purley and my grandmother Mary Jane Purley came by ox cart to Florence Township in 1858. Grandpa William, though, was from New Brunswick, Canada. And my grandmother Mary Jane, she was from Michigan. My parents are Joseph and Lucinda Maybe. Father was born in Dorset, England, but he served in the Minnesota Infantry during the Civil War. We lived on the corner of the family home of Maybes. We're on the corner of South Marion and South Prairie. And there, Father had a domestic by the name of Amy Clark help out Mother, because Mother had 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. We also had living with us Frank Koenig, who was from Germany, and he taught Papa how to make German sausages, because to support his family of 8 siblings, he had the meat market at 117 Main Street. When Papa died in 1925, Butch Huddle took that over with. I graduated Lake City High School in 1890. In 1891, I attended the Winona Normal College, and I graduated later on in 1897 from the Wheelock College in Boston. Between 1897 and 1901, I taught school in Minneapolis. In 1902, I married the handsome, very handsome Colonel James Noble Munro. James was a member of the West Point, and I have a picture on here that shows his graduating class, which somewhere in there is my handsome James. James was from West Albany, Minnesota, and we were both attending the high school at the same time, and James and I were high school sweethearts. James participated in the Philippine War and in the Spanish-American War, which I joined him both times there. after we were married in 1902. The Colonel retired in 1924, and in 1925 we built Bramble Hall. If you're going down the highway and before you reach Villa Maria, you will see the stone gate and the iron gate that leads to our estate known as Bramble Hall. It was a two-story New England-style home that the Colonel and I had, and both the Colonel and I were conservationists, and it was our idea to have Bramble Hall turned into a state park after our passings. Unfortunately, the Colonel died in 1929 at the age of 56. It was at that time that my sister, which some of you might know because she was a very famous poet, Nell Mabie, came to live with me until I passed on. And after my passing, she then worked very diligently with others to make Bramble Hall the Frontenac State Park.
I am Frank A. Wasserman. I was from Mitchell, Ontario, Canada. I moved here in 1871. I worked at the Young Store at the corner of Center and 63, or 63 and Lakeshore Drive in Lake City. I worked at the dry goods store there for a number of years before I moved on to the Oak Center store. I owned the Oak Center store outside of Lake City for a number of years as well. I married Mary Isabel Beatty, one of the members of the prominent Lake City families, and we moved out to Oak Center and ran the store there as well. Three sons, Wendell, and I believe that's Lawrence and Boyd. Both the boys are buried here. Don't know a whole lot about either one of the boys other than they didn't live very long, and then moved to the Boston Coulee, which was just where 63 is now, and was the house, the original building was torn down, and we took parts of the building and built the house that we lived in. And then when they put the freeway through, we had to move the house up on the hill, away from the highway. I have a passion and love for gardening. I loved growing flowers, small fruits like the grapevines you see that are growing from cuttings that I cut from my own grapes in our vineyard. A pineapple, which is unusual for this area to be growing, but I gave a shot and I'm actually growing a pineapple. And then I died in 1960 in Faribault, Minnesota, where I lived with my daughter till my death in 1960.